večer vsem. Today the working language, of course, is English, given that we have such a prominent guest from United States of America, one of the most important and biggest experts of cybersecurity in the world, and to our friends of panevropsko Slovenia, General Božič on my right, and our friend Damir Črnčec on the extreme left. We organized today this roundtable about cybersecurity because we strongly believe that this is an issue that must be open finally to the society in a simple way, if possible. Because on the global scenario, this is one of the most important issues, and now it's becoming also a field where also the Slovenian government is starting to work and to dig in order to prepare our country to the next future challenges in this domain. From the logistic point of view, we have to finish today at 1840. Unfortunately, there's another event after that. So my approach will be to place one question to each of our guests here, then probably just retuning a little bit the discussion, but I would like to open as soon as possible the discussion to the floor in order to have also action and reactions. First of all, I would like to thank you, the General Božič, to be here with us today. And given that we are in Slovenia, I would like to ask you what is for us, for Slovenians, the cyber security or the cyber domain, and how I think that this is now something very fresh. Our government is coping with this issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us. And probably when I start working in cyber, and probably Minister Hojs will say, what the heck are you doing in cyber? I can say that the first answer was, we over 30, a little bit over 30, we have no idea what is cyber, but we can organize. So maybe that's a point. And so we start working on cyber area. Actually, Minister Hojs started working on 12-20 in his mandate at 2012, and then we just continue. And probably now we are in the final phase. We are preparing the legislation regarding we call that information security, because we see cyber more than just wires and telephones and so on, but we see the whole environment as a part of cyber. And if you want to secure that environment on cyber, you have to look a little bit more on the social side too. I always say that because I have Apple Watch, probably I'm also part of cyber now, and I'm also, if you have the pacemaker, you're definitely in danger, and so you're also part of cyber, and you have to see that more than just the virus and the hardware on one side. So we developed a system, or actually we are going to develop a system, and it's not a complete. We are not there yet. That we will start building the ecosystem, and we define that you cannot have a secure environment on cyber if you don't incorporate the government, the business, so the companies, and the educational institutions. So that's a ecosystem that has to run and has to develop the cyber security. On the other side, the cyber now and cyber in 10 years will be everything what we touch. So everything will be cyber. And we discussed earlier if we need then not Ministry of Defense anymore, maybe in 10 years, but Ministry for the Informational Security or Cyber Security, because that will protect our life maybe in 10 years, because in few years everything what we have will be cyber or wire or whatever, smart city driven, and all our information will be there, and we have to protect ourselves and our country on that domain. And cyber domain is now the 5th domain. So we have land where we fight, and also now we have cyber where we actively fight nation against the nation.
May I just ask you, do we have a cyber domain in Slovenia? This is a clearly defined domain of defense?
Yes, we have, because we are part of NATO, because we are active a member of NATO, and NATO defined the cyber domain as a fighting domain and domain that we have to protect, and so we have that domain and we have to protect that domain for ourselves and for NATO. We always see NATO wrongly. It's NATO. It's not NATO for NATO. We are NATO, and NATO is, and so as a member of NATO, we have to protect as a country to be protected for us. Protection for us. Yeah.
Jumping from the Slovenian inside perspective, and given that Damir, you had the experience of leading two intelligence agencies, may I ask you, how is the outside Slovenia, and what are the biggest threat or challenges for our security? How do you see it?
Thank you. Nice for having me once again. I would like to say what I usually say about when I'm asked about cyber. I like to say that we are living in a time of cyber war. It's not a typical military definition of war, but more in the sense that when we are talking about war and we are calling war on drugs as a kind of phrase in the public, I would say this is the kind of correct correlation to use when talking about cyber to refer also the issue of war. And on the other hand, of course, we say I think, and I strongly believe that we live in also the time of low intensity operations regarding the cyber sphere. And as is kind of what is the definition of this low intensity operations, we have to say that this is a time of info gathering, and then we have 4 Ds: deception, deterrence, disruption, and destruction. Disruption and destruction. So basically this kind of around the whole issue of addressing the cyber. And on the other hand, we have to say also that when addressing the cyber, you have to touch upon the spheres or layers where is cyber, what is the cyber part of. And this is, of course, the physical sphere, talking about infrastructure, hardware, to be very simply about it. Then we have to say a logical or virtual sphere, which is basically software and protocols. And of course, then the third layer is a social one, which is basically individuals, people. So these are the actors or the players within the cyber domain. To come closely to the question, Laris asked me about the cyber and kind of foreign threats arriving to Slovenia from abroad regarding the issues of cyber. I have to say that, of course, in Slovenia, information security as a part of basically cyber, what we understand in today's terminology as a cyber, information security was always a very strong issue within the intelligence services in Slovenia, and also I would say within the police, so basically our national security system. And of course we addressed these issues long before the terminology as cyber, as is today, it was used in the practice. So this was I would say, almost a precondition of good intelligence work is to have good information security. And few of the scandals in Slovenian past came from the breaches in this information security. If you remember the cooperation between the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Slovenian military agency in the Balkans in mid-1990s, basically it was, and the document was leaked in the public at that time, the document came from internal information system of the military intelligence. And of course, it was inside breach, so it was from the individual who was dissatisfied with the work within the service, who basically leaked this information from the system. And of course, and then I will stop. I have to say that we talked or in practice work a lot about tackling the issue of information security in correlation to cyber when we were addressing so-called need-to-know principle within the Intel community. And when we surpassed this principle to need to share and then to responsibility to provide information. As we all know, this was one of the main reasons basically why 9/11 attacks in US weren't prevented, due to the lack of, I would say, connecting the dots and sharing the intelligence at that time because of the stovepipe system within the information security, information infrastructure, because you have basically fight of the two principles the whole time. Sharing within the information on the need-to-know basis, and on the other hand, it's basically the culture, intelligence, security culture is always addressing the issue. The information should be as close as possible. So the lowest is the number of the people who are having the access to the exact information or intelligence, the better. And those two principles are fighting the whole time. And nowadays, of course, and then I will stop here, this cyber issue, of course, surpassed pretty much the Intel services. And of course, the threats are, I would say, similar that we are having within the NATO member states. What is kind of specific probably to Slovenia, that maybe we are not so so evolved in this domain as, for example, Estonia was. So we are not so vulnerable as they were at that time. So this is basically maybe now the good opportunity for Slovenia when Mr. Božič will address this issue on the national level, to basically when you are going to spread this cyber into the whole social sphere in Slovenia, that you will parallel to that address security of this system and infrastructure on the same level as you are going to leak it or implement it into our public life.
Before coming to you, Professor, just I'm curious, Damir, who is the enemy? Sorry for being straight.
Yeah. Of course.
I have an answer to that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this would be from U.S. perspective, but in this domain in general, we are all users, all of us, individuals, and on the other hand, we are all also the liabilities. We are all posing threats to this domain. So whether you're but you have to be then very specific what kind of threats you are addressing, whether national one to intelligence services, to national security system, or to the Slovenian banks, for example, or whatever agency, governmental agency that is kind of part of this cyber domain. So we are all the users and we are all the enemies.
Well, thank you very much for your answer, because I was trying to pave the way for Professor. Professor Harknett had, I don't know when exactly, but in the last year, I think, with Professor Nye, when was the discussion last year, had a very much interesting discussion with Professor Nye, an academic world, very interesting, about the potential for the cyber system to work in a deterrence mindset. And I know you told us, Damir, specifically low intensity operations, and this is something that the Professor Harknett developed very well, let's say the point of view and the philosophy that can divide us. You wanted to have the slide?
That's okay.
It's okay without the slide. The division between war deterrence and, let's say, the sub category of the deterrence. So I just leave you the stage and you take your time.
So first of all, thank you for coming out on a night like this. One of the critical aspects of cybersecurity is resiliency, and so the resiliency in this audience is to be applauded. And thank you for allowing me to speak in my native language. That doesn't guarantee coherency, but at least I'll try to get my points across. So I'll pick up where you left off and go one step further. So how many of you connected to the internet today? Come on, admit it.
99%.
Right? How many of you found it useful? How many of you can imagine a future for Slovenia in which it does not leverage the digital space for economic wealth generation, for educational advancement? So then this space, right, is not the province of some great powers and competition, right? If the core of your nation's future, its people, its education, its mindsets, its economic activity, even if we just keep it in that small box, if you're part of this interconnected domain, and I'll come back to that term, I apologize, I've been flying across Europe, just came in from Oxford and caught something, so I'll blame the British. So I'm going to power through. I apologize if I have to clear my voice. That if you're part of this interconnected domain, you have no choice but to figure out how to solve interconnectedness to your benefit, how to manage interconnectedness to your benefit. And the solution set does not lie in segmentation. That's a temporary technical fix. We see lots of authoritarian regimes actually go there when they're pressured. Interestingly, unlike what Orwell would predict, states that have more of a centralized approach, when they have people out on the street, they literally cut the pipe off like the Egyptians did. They don't leverage it. Why? Because this space at the fundamental root, because it's fundamentally tied to information dissemination as its objective, parallels and forwards democratic governance principles much more than any other type of form of government. So we have to get this right because you have no choice but to get this right? And the way that we have to think about it, I applaud your legislation that's come out today to think about an ecosystem, right? Because that's a fundamentally, and I haven't read it, so if I push too far, it's me, not your representatives. But an ecosystem gets you focused on effects. It doesn't actually get you focused on where you are going with the enemy, right? Because it's not about the source, right? It's about the effect in this space, right? And so what effects do I want to take off the table, right? And that drives a different prioritization. And I can take off the table a lot if I get better at resiliency for critical infrastructure, for example, right? I can make those potential attacks inconsequential, although I would argue that is real war. And so we've got that covered. But I can think about all of this other potential disruption. And so I would push a little bit and say that in your ecosystem, it's not only the government, the private sector, which we should stop talking about a partnership between the public sector and the private sector. Right? We've been talking about this for 25 years. I've been working in this space for 25 years. In fact, I feel that concept is a bit of a Frankenstein because I was at the table in the Clinton administration that helped come forward with the critical infrastructure partnership model. Partnership assumes a shared interest, Right? There is no shared interest in the morning between a profit-seeking, security-relevant actor and a security-seeking actor. So over the weekend, you may have seen this release story about a fitness company, Strava, that releases a global heat map of all of their users. Right? How many people know this story? Okay. So this is one of these, companies that tracks your fitness, right? And they decided, hey, it would be cool to show, as a business thing, marketing thing, right? How many people are using it all around the world, right? And so they did this, and not surprisingly in the West and other places, just bright as all get out. And then even in these really dark regions of the world, there were these little lights. And I'm sure at their meeting, they said, wow, that's so cool, right? We're everywhere. Let's publish that. Even though it turns out to be forward deploy and secret military bases. Because, surprise, surprise, military soldiers around the world, not just the United States but others, they like to stay fit. Right? So here is a non-security seeking, they're profit seeking, but now all of a sudden they became security relevant. That's what it means to be in an interconnected domain. How do I anticipate that? Because I can't track down every new startup that's out there. So where do? I reverse this and understand what are the operational effects that I want to manage in an interconnected space. I have to assume that information is going to get out. So I'll finish if that's okay. Please. This notion of the tension between intel and operations, it actually goes worse than that. It's actually more fundamental, right? I would posit, right? Because this is an interconnected domain, not a fighting domain. Right? It's an interconnected domain in which I may have to fight. And that's qualitatively different. Because if it's interconnected, that means I'm constantly in contact with all of you. So how do I think about collateral damage in that space? I can't. It's not a concept that makes sense in cyberspace. It makes sense in a territorial space. And so the final point I want to throw out to start our discussion is that the reason we've focused on the big attack is because we have tended to think about the disruption of sources of national power requiring war. Right? Because really the only way that I could get to national sources of power was to cross borders. That's why territoriality became the fundamental role of government. And then we built a whole international legal system around it that reinforces it. Sovereignty, for one example. And then we use strategies like deterrence that assumes there's a break in activity, that assumes that I can use the prospective threat to shape your behavior because you're at zero. You're outside my border. You're not attacking yet. If you're attacking, deterrence has failed. Well, if this is an interconnected space of constant contact, then I can't use that strategy. I can't use a strategy whose measure of effectiveness is the absence of action in an environment of constant action. I need to think differently. So just like 1945, where one plane, one city, one bomb said, I can't secure by defense anymore. So I came up with a really crazy idea. My security is going to rest in the heads of my adversary. Think about that for a second. At the end of World War II, the United States is pumping out as much military capacity as possible, right, to win the war on the battlefield. If I had gone into the U.S. Congress and said, look, I know something about the Manhattan Project, I'm looking over the horizon, and what I need you to do to prepare security in the future is spend trillions of dollars on a military capacity whose purpose will be never to be used. Think about if I said that to them on VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, May 1945. How fast would I be kicked out in the street? Right? How crazy would that have sounded? And so I only ask you to open your mind to the possibility that we're at another one of those fundamental breaks, that we have to adjust to an ecosystem approach of interconnectivity. Right? We can't go back to segmentation and strategies that use that. And so the litmus test is, can I bring synergy? How do I exploit synergy rather than segmentation? So you're not just the enemy because you connected to the internet, but we are all the enemy because we are locked into old paradigms, right? And they are really, really hard to break. Really hard to break. But the empirical evidence in front of us over the last 20 years, no one can sustain the argument that cyberspace is becoming more secure. The frequency of attacks, the scope of attacks, the range and number of actors involved in aggression, right, are all on this trajectory. And that actually is coming not from the fact that we're not working hard enough. It's because we're not working in the operational space reality that's in front of us. Thank you for letting me go on.
No problem at all. If I may, just to clarify to the public. You told us that we have a high frequency of attacks every day and every second in the cyberspace. But when is an act of war?
Right. So this is critical, right? I would argue in my model that there are acts of war that can use cyber means. So the accurate term is cyber-enabled war. In fact, the more accurate is war. It doesn't matter if I blow up your critical infrastructure using kinetic means or zeros or ones. If that is destruction and that fits in the category, in fact, it's highly dangerous to introduce that distinction. Why would you say to an adversary, if you destroyed my electric grid with a plane, with a bomb, we're at war. But if you use zeros and ones, I've got to go debate that in Parliament. Why the heck am I not using zeros and ones? So we have to get clarity, and I would argue that we already have it in international law, right? It comes down to how we address war, and it's not the means, again, it's the effects. But here's where this becomes finally important, so deterrence from the United States perspective is the way we avoid war, right? Strategically, we threaten anybody who would come at us to cross over that territoriality, right, with a capacity that would make it unacceptable, right? But what now is opened up is what I argue should be understood as a new seam in power competitions. For the first time in history, we have access to national sources of power, the possibility of manipulating them, disrupting them, right, without having to violate territoriality. And all of our policies and all of our laws assume that the only way that happens is through territorial violation. And that's why we haven't been paying attention to this. And so what I would argue is there's this huge space that is actually strategic. And the definition of strategic effect is, do I shift the relative distribution of power? And if I can, then it's strategic, even if it's not war. And therefore I have to treat strategic behavior as a campaign that the state has to play a role in. And if you look at the new strategy documents of the United States, that concept is introduced. Right? We've been not focused on actually the most important space, this seam, right, in which our power can be affected.
Thank you. Dobran, you wanted to react something that Damir told us about the vulnerability of Slovenia, is correct?
No, I don't know what I wanted to comment. I forget about that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's
Okay, then
probably,
if you allow me, then I have a question
Yeah,
for you.
of course.
About the role of the state. Well, if, you know, in the normal social life, many times we are facing the true reality that usually the state is the enemy for the public, for the social side. It's really the state the enemy at this moment? Is the state misusing the cyber opportunity, or is something different? How is the vision now at this moment?
It's I argue that we all struggle, and I believe also the USA and Israel and not North Korea and China, probably not, but we all in Europe, we are struggling because that space that we were talking before, it was owned in the past by IT experts, by informational technology experts, and it was owned by them, and it was their word. And usually that space was treated as a spreading the democracy, spreading the ideas, and nobody should control my word. And now, because that word is becoming a huge danger to people, to states, and it's a great tool for criminals. So we have three actors. We have state against the state, so espionage, attacking the critical infrastructure. We have the patriot hackers, so the non-state actors. They're you know, like in Estonia, they were used the tools to attack the Estonia at that time, and we have criminals. I think it's, and I can get through some data. It's $6,000 billion crime on the internet every year, and it's the biggest economy now, and so on, and now it's the governments should step in, and the states should start controlling the word that was owned or pursued, but that was owned by the IT experts. And I think that it's a responsibility of governments and the states to start actively be part of that controlled environment, because it's we all depend on that environment. And of course now it's many debates. Security on one side and freedom on the other side, and it's always, you know, I like to mention, you know, we don't have any issues if Google tracks us all the time, if Amazon tracks us all the time, or Siri or whatever, but we have issue if the government is there and protecting us. So it's always, oh yeah, you're protecting us, you're spying on us, and so on. So that's always, you know, balance between the freedom and security.
Well, may I ask you, in shaping this new legislation for Slovenia, are you facing this kind of problems in the Slovenian environment?
Yeah, we are facing all the time. So it's we are facing. So on one side, it's a huge force of IT experts in the past, and they see just putting the antiviruses or minimal standards on the internet, and that's it. We are saying no. Government should step in, and it's more than just that. So the government should control that, should have the central point of view, and should control the environment control, or should see what's going on in the environment to protect the people. Mm-hmm. So it's struggle, and it's struggle in Germany, Austria, Italy, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would like to touch upon two issues, two things. First, let me kind of reiterate how NATO is basically addressing the issue of cyber, and Slovenia as a part of NATO, because we said few words about it. So from 2014, basically, cyber defense is part of NATO collective defense. Basically, Article 5. It was put down or written down in the communique in Wales Summit in 2014. And later in 2016, this issue so much evolved that it's actually written down that it's cyber attack or to the member state can be also addressed with the invocation, or basically member state can invoke Article 5. So this is basically same as classical kinetical war or aggression. So this is basically the perception within the NATO, and also should have been in Slovenia, but of course we don't have discussions like this, not in the public in Slovenia. This is kind of addressing the NATO. And the thing I wanted to mention was when I kind of address issue of cyber, and this is, I agree with Professor, of course, we have to start to talk about paradigm shift within ourselves, the perceptions, what is happening. So we are living basically in the era of fourth industrial revolution, which is basically digital revolution. And when we are talking about cyber, we should talk about, of course, Internet of Things, automatization, robotization, and the issue that I like to talk about a lot, artificial intelligence. Because I see basically artificial intelligence, and I'm not the clever guy. I think that Elon Musk and also the Stephen Hawking said that this is a real threat to the humanity if we are not going to address artificial intelligence in a connection with the robotics correctly. That could we kind of found ourselves in the Terminator movie or something like that. So, and this is the real paradigm shift. Cyber as part of this kind of fourth industrial revolution, digital age, and we have quite of prognosis for the next decades how robots are going to be used in our basically daily life around us. And this is again, I would say, a topic that is pretty much far away from the discussions in Slovenia. So I'm very happy also that we have here opportunity to say a few words about it.
Thank you very much. I think we warmed it up. Do you would like to add something?
Quick,
Yeah, please.
This is absolutely essential. I would suggest, I'd go back a little further. I think we're in the Bronze Age in our thinking on this. And you're absolutely right. AI is going to be a step function, right? And we are putting algorithmic decision making on top of a very vulnerable layer, right? It's being built on top of this, right? And one of the reasons why we're the enemy, I wrote an essay back in 1993, I'm going to date myself, called Orwell in Reverse, right? And I argued that Orwell got it wrong, that at its fundamental, IT empowers the individual relative to the state, not the other way around. And we can talk about the evidence that I have for that. Doesn't mean the state can't use it, but it means this has been really about, and so therefore, those that are concerned about privacy have had their focus on the wrong problem. Because you've lost all your privacy. You have no privacy. And in fact, beyond privacy, as we go into artificial intelligence, which is just algorithmic decision making. Laris told me that as he was coming in, the state highway system was telling everybody that if you needed to get to Zagreb, go north. And everybody was going south. And my first question to him was, what's Google GPS telling people to do? Because that's what they're doing. They're not looking at the state sign. And I'd lay a decent wager that GPS was telling you to go south.
So this is the reason I have no Google.
Yeah.
This is the reason I was going north. Yeah. Good. So I was the only one on the highway.
And the final,
really,
the final point here is that we have to secure freedom. There isn't a trade-off between security and freedom. This has been a false dichotomy by the political spectrum that should be the most concerned about it, right? Because the only actor that's going to come in and cut out some segment of control back to the individual is actually the moderate regulatory democratic state. And unless we start to open up that mindset and realize that it's not Big Brother, right, that has taken us away. Because you know what? We were pretty clever about Big Brother. We have laws that intervene in capability. So I'm not telling you states don't have capability, but we have democratic laws that protect civil liberties as a starting point. And you know what? That makes this much harder to secure. But darn it, we're going to secure it in that much harder place. But the market is going to keep going. And so either you can hand over anticipatory behavioral control to whoever wins this, Alphabet, Facebook, any of the giants. Google. Alphabet is the parent of Google, if you don't know. You know, but is unless we have some intervention in that anticipatory behavioral control that Orwell was so worried about, you will find yourself in. It will be comfortable. It'll be convenient. So the sci-fi thriller is not 1984. It's probably closer to Huxley's, right, thesis. So I just leave it at that. We have to resolve this, and we're struggling because the actor that can help us, we've been stiff-arming for way too long. And so there has to be not a partnership with business, but an alignment. We got to figure out a way that they can make their profit, but they are security relevant. And their security relevance places upon them an obligation to forward the national security. Right? Because we should understand and move to a point where we stop talking about that adjective. Because unless Slovenia is going to disconnect from the internet, there is no difference between cybersecurity and national security.
Well, thank you very much. We warm it up now. It's nice to know that state is coming back. We just have to work on a very democratic liberal state, and then everything is resolved. I would like now to open the stage for questions and answers. Please, we have now good 40 minutes to dig and to dip our knowledge. Wow, as always. Please.
Okay, so I'll pose a question about the state-individual relations. So what you guys telling me is that we need another Leviathan 2.0. What needs to happen that the people understand that? Do we need a cyber Pearl Harbor?
Let's go.
Yeah, I think this is the most important the point that was basically mentioned today. When I was asked 10 years ago, even more than 10 years ago, at the time as a director of intelligence service, how do you eavesdropping to the people, how you're doing your clandestine work, I always said, we are not the problem. The problem are private actors in Slovenia who can buy eavesdropping equipment for a few bucks and use it, and nobody knows about it, and nobody controls it. We are over-controlled in Slovenia. Our oversight in this domain is, I would say, very, very good. So this was at that time. Nowadays, as it was mentioned today, we voluntarily gave away our privacy to the corporations. We don't know what they're doing. I just know, for example, for Google, that basically they are stockpiling everything what we are doing. Their databases are so strong and big ones that all of our search for at least 50 years going back are going to be stockpiled within their floating islands there when they have them, where they have them, and basically nobody is controlling that. You know, in Slovenia, after depends on the types of the personal data, but after 3 months, 1 year, 12 months, 18 months, they have to be eradicated. They never existed, and nobody is taking care about Google, and we are voluntarily giving everything to this corporation. And this is also kind of a question for a professor, maybe. Coming back to the Google, last year we heard how Facebook shut down basically artificial intelligence operation where the computers or subjects of artificial intelligence, they went beyond the algorithms that they were written for them. they start to talk to each other over the kind of prescribed area. And I know that the Google didn't do the same. So basically they are still doing that. So basically who in the States, for example, is controlling, or if there is a kind of national governmental entity who is kind of having a hand over this development within the field of artificial intelligence, within these big corporations.
So the quick answer is no. Right? China has published just recently a national strategy for artificial intelligence, in which, very unusual for them, they have stated a strategic objective clear. By 2030, they want to be the top leading artificial intelligence state in the world. Excuse me for saying it, I usually don't agree with the president of Russia, but on lots of things. But I agree with him on this when he made the statement that the state that dominates in AI will dominate international politics. But I would disagree with him in taking off the I again, because I would argue that the most significant second actor in artificial intelligence is not the United States, so I would put China first, but we can talk about that later. It's Alphabet, it's Google, right? The capacity that they're showing, developments they have, and the most important is the pervasive interaction, because machine learning requires scale. And so the advantage that both the Chinese have a structural advantage, because they can get into everything of their population. There isn't a civil liberties break there. Google has some, but very loose. So when you ask me, is there a body? There isn't even law that's constraining this. And so I had the opportunity to ask the CEO of Google, how do I understand you as a strategic actor? And since this is an open space, I won't give you the answer. But he wasn't happy with that question, right? To understand them as a strategic actor, right? That they're changing the basis of power through this. This is not science fiction. So I'll just leave you with this. In this same meeting, we had a report from the dean of our best university in the country right now in AI, which is Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And he happily reported, he said, sometimes there's days where I go down to the lab and I feel like Dumbledore from Harry Potter and going into Hogwarts, because we can't explain what's happening. So we call it magic, right? And I almost jumped out of my seat and said, that magic and national security, that's not a good combination, right? I don't know where Voldemort's coming from, right? But that's not a good thing. So you're absolutely right. We have evidence in the laboratory level of not being able to secure or make safe these algorithms, but we're deploying them into this space. Again, because the marketplace has pushed the state out of this. Let me just finish. I think there's going to be unbelievable human advancement that's positive about this. And that's why I call for an alignment. I'm not talking about shutting down profit seeking. I'm not talking about shutting down innovation. We have to change perspective. So as the general said, this is not a technical issue, right? This is a behavioral, political, strategic, economic issue in a technically challenging environment. And we have to bring that together and rebalance, not only to get individual freedom protected, but make sure we don't go down the Hollywood sci-fi route. Because right now, we have evidence that we're moving in that direction.
And nobody's controlling that.
No, it's... No. Who saw the movie Demolition Man in 1993? So it's, It's and they predicted what will happen in 2032, I think, 34. Everything is now already. So the FaceTime, the self-driving cars, and so on. Who saw the movie Ghost in the Shell? Everything is predicted. So the artificial intelligence, and we can see now, Sophie. Do you know Sophie, the artificial intelligence robot? She can speak much better than I do. She can do things much better than I do, and it's there. And then Atlas on one side, the robot that can flip over and so on, and you can imagine that. And Musk said that we can survive only if we robotize ourselves. And I think we are already on that path. We are already on that path, and that's my just argue that probably in 20 years we can see the CEO of the artificial intelligence whatever company is the same as the president of whatever, and that's something that probably we are going to, I don't know, but we lost, and that you can see that in the movies, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the state will have something to say.
I know, but maybe it's one of state. And another argue that it was published in Forbes in magazine that AI is the future and Slovenia holds the key. Just to argue, Damir, we have one of the biggest artificial intelligence lab in Slovenia, and if you go there, you see the also mystery. If you go on the one page, double click, and they have 90% of your personal features, whatever. They know what you're doing, what you're drinking, where you're going, and so on. So it's amazing what can be achieved. But I have one thought, and just to imagine what is happening in the world in 2017. So for all people that you're using Twitter, I don't use Twitter, every 60 seconds, 500,000 tweets is sent away, 500,000 tweets. And we do every 60 seconds, we do the 3.3 million Facebook posts, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, and because of that, I'm saying that, and it's growing, I'm saying that probably who will control that, probably will control us at the end of the day. And so that's probably frightening. And now in European Union, just to finish with that, European Union is now a huge debate how we should start projects where we start controlling the artificial intelligence influences, and how we should get the social touch, the legislation, everything else on place, where to step in and start controlling the part of artificial intelligence. But I think we lost the momentum. That's my perception. We lost the momentum.
The first telegram that went across the Atlantic on a cable had 21 words in it. It took 17 hours to get across 21 words, right? Mm-hmm. There's no variable. I can't bring speed. I've thrown speed out of my model, right? It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
But what we understand is that territoriality assumed distance, right? It assumed borders that had space. So even if I had an adversary sitting on my border, I could see them massing troops at a sufficient rate, right, that I would have time to do something about it. How do I secure in a space in which there is no time? The scary thing is that the answer will be Google's offering us this really cool decision-making algorithm, and I can move the human decision maker out of the loop in order to address the time problem. I would submit to you that the individual has to stay at least on the loop. Right? But if the human goes out of the loop, we're just asking for trouble.
Gentlemen, let me be brutal. I really liked state, you know that. But now I would like to feel comfortable believing that the state is coming back, that the state is good, and the state is not. I'm 40, and the state is a dissolution. But let's be concrete. Snowden told us clearly the state was collaborating and pushing Google to be part of the enemy plan in this case. What happened?
So what, and again, let me just stress that I'm a professor from Cincinnati.
I'm not, yes, of course, as always. I represent the United States of America.
This is my
NSA.
this is my my academic analysis, from that role. Edward Snowden revealed capability. He did not reveal behavior that was illegal or unauthorized. You talked about 9/11. The system that was set up was in response to 9/11 because it was not that the information wasn't there. It was the information, you got it absolutely right, was not connected by the right agencies to the right decision maker. And so Congress and the American people said, I need you to anticipate this. This can't happen again. And so we passed a law that reorganized. So we created a Department of Homeland Security and brought a whole set of capability together. And the naivete of Snowden is that he never looked at legal authority. He didn't understand legal authority. He didn't operate at the level at which decisions are made, in which decisions are never made without a lawyer in the room, and a lawyer behind the door, and a lawyer down the hallway. Right? You want to talk about constraint. The default is to constrain. The United States, in fact, had a public doctrine of restraint. Now, I am not here to tell you that that capability didn't exist. But there's a difference between capability and behavior. And so what was happening with these companies? The US government wasn't collecting the data. The companies were, because you all in the public are okay with that. And so we had to find a legal mechanism, right, to establish a relationship that said, we've been told by the American people that we have to be one step ahead. We have to see where this is coming from. And what we know is that bad actors are using cyberspace very effectively. And guess what? They know our legal constraints. And they are acting right in that seam. Part of the seam is the fact that we constrain our capability. So I know it's hard. We've been brought up in this world of 1984. We've been brought up in Orwell. And so when Snowden released this, we go, boom, that's it. Guess what? That month that he released those documents, 1984, reappeared on the New York Times bestseller list as the #1 book. I mean, that's remarkable, right? But that's not what it revealed. What it in fact revealed was a capability that was being used to secure the population of America that was actually now taken away because adversaries knew it and could adjust their operational behavior, or at least that's what the U.S. government has reported. And I think it's a reasonable supposition that that's probably what happened, right? But this is where we either have to trust, and I understand that's a strong word, but we either have to trust that we are countries of law or we're not. Right? There are countries in which that mediating variable between capability and use is non-existent. Okay? And they have some advantages. But we're going to play and win this game with that intervening variable. Right? And we have to understand, and sometimes you have to moderate this, right? So after Snowden, we tweaked, right, the Freedom Act, right, to adjust some things. We have to iterate this, right? But I'm not comfortable allowing the norms in this space to be driven by state actors who don't respect individual civil liberties. So either we're going to let them drive it, right, through malicious behavior. We're going to allow the market to be unfettered and drive it, And I think there's some, as much as there's going to be greatness, there's also great concern. Or we do bring in, and so maybe the nuance, this is what I take from this trip, is your observation, right? That it's not the state that comes back, it's law that comes back, right? It's the intervening variable between capability and actual behavior. And you, as a democratic society, have control over law. And you can set the standards in which that capability is used. But you need the capability. So if you leave the field empty, then you're leaving the field to a bunch of actors who are going to drive it in a direction that is not in your interests. Not in an information dissemination model, but in an information control model.
Well, thank you very much. So it means we need not only a state, but also a lawyer. Please, another question, please.
Yeah. Okay, we are now at the stage when, by using these IT technologies, we freely delegate our freedom to the players in this scene. What about the next stage, which is very much debated now, about computer-brain interface? If we enter this, then it will be not just our actions will be controlled all the time.
Yeah. Do you want to start? Oh. So let me get a quick example of how you get the intermediary step to that, right? In healthcare, we are going to have a system of information sharing that enables a doctor to have an assistant. We're probably going to roboticize them and make them look, human, just so people are comfortable with it. But remember, it's an algorithm. It's just math, right? I don't know if anybody's a mathematician in here, but mathematicians are going to rule the world, right? You didn't know that, right? And they're going to have access to every person who had this health condition under this immediate conditionality. And they're going to be able to run an analytical analysis that says that in 98% of the chance when this occurs, when all these variables show up, you better get that person to surgery. It doesn't look like they should go to surgery, but I'm going to pull in the entire globe's health record. And that doctor is going to say, no, based on my experience, go home, take an aspirin, right? Am I going to rely on a doctor, no matter how well read they are? How much capacity does the human brain have, right, relative to that algorithm that can look at terabytes of information in seconds? So I'm going to start to get comfortable with the robotic assistant, right? If I'm comfortable with the robotic system, why don't I just get an implant, right, that knows when I'm in danger, right? So I don't even go to the doctor, right? I go to the facility, right, that's going to save my life. I'm telling you that there are medical companies who are making that pitch right now, or if they're not, they're going to steal my idea, right? And I just lost a lot of money. Right? But that's going to happen, sir.
It's happening.
It's already happening. But I'm saying so that implant, right, is the interface between the human and the computer, right? But if I can alter, so again, here's the issue. If you're interconnected, then you are vulnerable. Because interconnectedness, what I said to the AI folks at Oxford, is you've been worried about safe AI that will do what you tell it to do. And so their solution set to create safe AI is to be able to leave a backdoor that gets into the core, right, algorithm and readjust it, right? And you have to build that in because you can't let it learn, right, to defend itself. But that means that inherently, that's an insecure AI. So what I have to do to make it safe is going to make it insecure. And if I have an adversary who wants to exploit that, they will.
And if you're not connected, you're gonna die anyway.
Very positive.
No, it's a project that it's running. A few billionaires are paying that. As I read that in 2030, probably our brains can be copied into the computer or into the robot. So that's and it's there. They say probably 2028 that can be achieved, and the computer can be as quick as human brains.
Poor robot with my brain. Damir.
I think, firstly, I would come back to the previous discussion and say, when we are talking about the capabilities and basically how we are using them, we can use a very, very simplistic parallel to kind of with one that we can describe the situation, so to speak. So within the military, we have tanks, we have airplanes, we have rockets, and we are not firing them unless there are some kind of events taking place, and then we have clear decision maker who is basically using. So we have capabilities within our societies, not in Slovenia, but in the US, for example, to 10-20 times destroy the world, and it didn't happen since.
We like redundancy.
Yeah. So the deterrence is working. So basically, the capabilities to destroy the world are here already for decades now, and it didn't happen. So this is kind of regression or kind of coming back to the previous discussion. When addressing these issues, chipping is already here and is taking place. For example, for the people with the heart disease, you have the systems in place who are operational. When the people who have bypasses, they have implants who are basically via the communication reporting back to the hospitals what is happening with the heart. So, I mean, and then if you have a breach to that system, you can basically shut down and game over. What I wanted to say, and I think to open maybe to say a few words about that, I mentioned the fourth industrial revolution, and we are now saying that like everybody is going to be in this kind of sphere. Into 30 to 50, 10 billion people probably will going to have on planet Earth. So are we going to have 10 billion people being part of this digital revolutionized world? Or it's going to be the same as it happened basically with all three previous industrial revolutions, who are basically the drivers for some societies, but the others stand behind. And we have now, of course, I'd like to say that in Afghanistan we were fighting the war with our third generation or third wave, as the Tofflers they said, but the society there is basically living still in the third wave society. So first wave. So we are having this kind of big discrepancies within our societies on our planet Earth, and the issue is, or the question is this is going to be the first revolution that is going to cover the whole world population.
So if you look at the...
Professor, yeah.
I mean, if you look at the record of the IT revolution, there's one constant, and that is that we have these step functions in efficiency that drive costs down. And part of what drives costs down is greater access. So we actually have a market dynamic, what I call customizable convenience. Right? We don't want to just provide convenience, but it's customizable down to the individual. Very powerful market force. There's nothing structurally stopping the expansion of that. Right? I don't think that we're going to see an egalitarian outcome of 10 billion users.
A true communism.
Yeah, well, you can
We understand this in Slovenia, very well.
I would call it a network.
You're from West, we call it communism here.
I understand. And we have to figure out the governance structure.
We're all equal.
But what if we have 7 billion? That's pretty big. And if the majority of those actors are non-security seeking, security relevant actors, then they pose a challenge, right, to secure this space. Because they're uploading versions and they're asking for software and they're asking for hardware and processes that constantly change the terrain. So what I had defended right now, it's not defended anymore, right? Because somewhere that terrain and space changed. And your observation about tanks, planes, that is still relevant, right? Because we haven't left terrestrial form. We're still corporal forms, and we're going to fight in that space. I'm just suggesting that there's a whole other space, and the paradigm shift has to cover that space, right? And the fact that it has all of these non-security seeking actors that are security relevant, boy, that's a huge challenge for us. So the fluidity of the technical space means that this is a persistent environment. So where nuclear weapons created an offense-dominant environment, the offense wins. Therefore, defense isn't acceptable. In the kinetic world, we've always ranged from offense advantage to defense advantage. And we suffer terrible costs if we get that wrong. So the general staffs of 1914 thought they were in an offense advantaged world. And there was actually empirical evidence, the American Civil War, the Russo-Japanese War, that told them it was defense. It was advantaged, all the tactics, technical, operational space. And we paid a horrible cost in sticking with those strategies. And the French came out of that war and said, okay, it's defense advantaged. And so I'm going to build the most technologically advanced defensive wall ever. But it had shifted to offense advantaged, right? So they got it wrong again. So you can have really smart people looking at activity at the highest security levels and get these things wrong. And what I'm suggesting is that we've been getting it wrong because where we need to focus is not up and high and right. We've got that covered. We've got a system to manage war. It's going to break out in isolated places, right? And in fact, I think we're going to manage it pretty well. But this space is going to affect my strategic place in the world. And I better start securing it. And that requires me to be persistent in understanding where my vulnerabilities are that are relevant to you exploiting them and where your vulnerabilities are so that I can meld together resiliency, defense, and countering and contesting capabilities to stay persistently one step ahead and secure freedom, right, rather than watch it go away.
You want to add something?
No, just in joke, I call that digital communism. The important thing is who will control, who will be the president of that 7 billion people, I don't know. And it's very easy, if you use my system, my network, I can give you protection.
Yeah.
And it's easy maybe then to answer the state actor and the role of the state, I don't know, but we are going in a really, in a path that we don't know where we are going or what is the end, and it's really we should put a lot of effort. The state is coming in and start controlling legally the environment and the domain,
and having these types of conversations in the public space. So your notion of intelligence being tight.
Professor,
gotta
if we ask us can country or can state manage your data, or just the storage your data? You will say no. Probably they will say no, and that's the start of the question.
But in the United States, we did the only so far legislation we've passed was on medical records.
Yeah.
And we said that you can't monetize monetize medical records, right? And most people know that as HIPAA, right? And they go, oh, I got to sign these forms, and it says, but that was the first moderate regulatory effort by the state to help the individual against a system that, if that system wasn't blocked by that law, would be selling your medical stuff left and right.
Questions? Please.
I'm wondering if we have necessary and adequate knowledge, skill set, and also tools to successfully combat cyber threats in the future?
All three.
I mean, general is the fighter, I think.
You're on the front line now.
No, I think we have, definitely we have. The enemy, the crime, or the state, it's always maybe a step in front of us, but it's everything, it's how much control do you want to have in that environment. So probably you can have almost 100% controlled environment and probably 100% safety, like in many countries around the world. But then you lose the open democratic society that we all want to have. So can we guarantee 100% safety? No, that's probably nobody can do that. But if we can provide an environment that it's safe enough, yes, probably the answer is yes.
May I redefine a little bit the question? Let's say our big problem, big issue in the last 15, 20 years is that we are fighting with super trooper army against the first war, let's say against the terrorism, asymmetric war. This asymmetric confrontation very likely will be in the future even bigger. We will have the cyber societies and we will have no cyber societies. There will be a vulnerability for us from this no cyber society using no cyber technology against us.
No, I think that's why we have to remember that we live on a terrestrial space. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying we've got that covered and we need to keep that, right? So these things are not trade-offs. And this is the problem with I think the literature. So the book that I'm writing is called Nuclear Prominence and Cyber Persistence, right? And on the nuclear prominent level, deterrence has been the solution set. It's very dangerous, right? But it works. The fact that it works actually makes cyber persistence a relevant, salient place for competition. But it's not a strategy that works in that space. So I would argue to you that one of the things so I have a default to human creativity and the youth behind us. In my classrooms, I don't believe that my students understand the word privacy. That's a concept that dates me.
From past, huh?
Yeah, right? Mm-hmm. This is an environment that shares information about themselves without thought. So how do I create? I have to go to where they are. I'm not going to get them coming up with creative solutions about privacy, talking to them about privacy. I'm going to get creative solutions, talking to them as early as I can in your education system, that they actually have a civic duty to engage in helping create a more secure cyberspace. And so they just need to understand that every day when they connect, they're not neutral. You're either making the situation worse by your bad cybersecurity practices, or you're making it better. And so one of the pieces that I've worked on is in the United States is shifting our educational focus away from private interest. The reason you need to do this is to protect your identity, right? And shift it to say, you actually have a broader contribution to make, right? You have a civic duty, and that civicness is the other thing we need to bring back into the conversation. Because privacy, they have no idea what that means. That's about as close as north, south, east, and west, which they have no idea exists. They have no directional sense whatsoever. So when GPS goes down, we're going to have a lot of people standing on corners, looking up into the sky, frozen, and not being able to move.
There was also another question somewhere there, but very quick, please.
Yes, sir. It's a question for your professor. Would you say that China is destined to win the AI race, considering it has complete control over big data of all the Chinese companies in China, as well as they see foreign companies that now have to base their data centers in China, whereas we're very wary of basically government either cooperating with the private sector or having control of big data.
Yeah. So, well done. In the current situation, the answer is yes. There's three things you need for AI. The math, everybody's got the math. That's known globally. Supercomputing, the capacity to crunch huge sums of data. The Chinese have the two fastest computer systems in the world right now. But there's other places that have. So, and you can catch up on that. But the third thing you need is behavioral data at massive scale, right? So not just data, not just artifacts of what people are doing, but can I actually see exactly what you're doing in the exact moments that you do? So I can build the conditionalities right down to that level. And I would submit to you that yes, they have a structural advantage in that. So the question becomes, how do we pass legislation in Western democracies, right, to give Slovenia an opportunity to pursue this as an economic asset, and maybe you can become the leading force, right, that solves that issue, that goes around that structural issue and says, we don't need access to that behavioral, right, in order to produce the machine learning and neural network outcomes. If you can do that, then you're an AI superpower, right? So they've got a built-in advantage right now. But I would submit we've got to become really clever about how to figure out that third, exactly where you went, right? And my solution is we got to leave that alone. We got to leave, we got to protect civil liberties and figure out a way to learn.
Well, thank you very much. Time is running out. We have, unfortunately, to close our discussion. I'm very glad for the discussion, for the event. Thank you very much to the public for coming in this really terrible day in the weather conditions. Thank you very much to our guests for joining the Slovenian Pan-European movement in this discussion and opening us new horizons about cybersecurity and our cyber future. I wish to all three good luck in this field, good work for the future, especially to you for our security, national security. As we understood today, state is the solution, not the problem. And as I already stressed, we have only to work on a very well done, stable, democratic, liberal state. That's the only thing that is remaining on us. Exactly. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you, Professor.